Welcome to When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, where I look at the films that shaped the MTV generation. Today I'm looking at 1985's St. Elmo's Fire, which unintentionally spawned the 80s phenomenon known as the Brat Pack. Directed by Joel Schumacher from a screenplay by Schumacher and his assistant, Carl Kurlander, St. Elmo's Fire was a critical bomb, but was a huge hit with young audiences. The box office success of St. Elmo's Fire opened the door to Schumacher's long career directing big-budget Hollywood films, including The Lost Boys, Flatliners, Batman Forever, and Batman and Robin. Over the instrumental love theme from St. Elmo's Fire by prolific Canadian composer David Foster, 7 close friends graduate from Georgetown University. For the purposes of this film, the role of Georgetown will be played by the University of Maryland, because when the filmmakers tried to film at Georgetown, the higher-ups at Georgetown read the script and said, nope, hard pass. 4 months after graduation, the 7 friends are all living in Washington, D.C.'s Georgetown neighborhood, making their way in the world. We will meet them all in great detail later, but in brief, they are Kirby, an aspiring lawyer played by Emilio Estevez, whom we saw back in my analysis of Repo Man, Alec, an aspiring politician played by Judd Nelson, Leslie, an aspiring architect who has put her career plans on the back burner due to her serious relationship with Alec, and who is played by Sheedy, whom we saw a few episodes back in War Games, Kevin, an aspiring writer played by Andrew McCarthy, Jules, an international banker / coke-snorting party girl played by Demi Moore, Wendy, a sweet-natured social worker played by Mare Winningham, and Billy, a saxophone-playing party boy played by Lowe, who had already achieved heartthrob status by starring in The Outsiders, which co-starred Emilio Estevez, Oxford Blues, which co-starred Sheedy, and Class, which co-starred Andrew McCarthy. In 1985, the pool of bankable young actors was relatively small compared to the demand for teen or young adult-geared films, and thus they all tended to work with each other repeatedly. For instance, Estevez, Nelson, and Sheedy had all co-starred together in the John Hughes-directed Gen X classic The Breakfast Club, which had hit theaters 5 months before St. Elmo's Fire. The whole gang gathers at the hospital after Billy gets into a drunken fender bender and bangs up Wendy's car. After Billy is booked for drunk driving, Kirby has a chance encounter at the hospital with a doctor named Dale Biberman, who graduated from Georgetown a few years earlier and on whom Kirby has had a long-standing crush. Dale is played by Andy McDowell, then known for Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan, Lord of the Apes. She'd go on to star in films like Sex, Lies, and Videotape, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and Groundhog Day. Billy makes bail, so in a sequence scored to St. Elmo's Fire, Man in Motion, the #1 hit single from John Parr, they all head to their favorite local haunt, a bar called St. Elmo's, where Kirby works as a waiter. We learn that Billy and Wendy are sort of involved, or at least are drifting closer into friends with benefits territory, even though Billy has a wife and a new baby. We also learn that Alec has been pressuring an uncertain Leslie into getting engaged, that Kevin has a secret crush on Leslie, and that Jules is feeling stressed out by the impending death of her despised stepmother. Leslie and Alec cuddle together in their palatial loft, which includes one of those totally awesome glass block dividing walls that all the coolest restaurants and homes had in the 80s, and an entire wall inexplicably devoted to a Nike billboard. They're interrupted by Jules, who stops by to indulge in some fabulous product placement for Absolute Vodka. Kirby tells his roommate Kevin about his unrequited crush on Dale Biberman. They're joined by Billy, who crashes with them for the night because he's been arguing with his wife. Kevin visits Jules, who is living in a bizarre pink and gold paradise complete with a mural of Billy Idol with a light-up neon earring. I'm not a huge fan of the color pink, and yet I would wrestle a bear for a shot at living in that apartment. The big selling point of St. Elmo's Fire is how attractive this film is. Everyone is great looking, and all of their residences are peak 80s Valhalla. Yes, they are all empty shells of human beings, and yes, all of their problems are self-made and wildly unsympathetic, but you know what? It barely matters. St. Elmo's Fire is 80s lifestyle porn. You won't learn anything from it, but you might get some great decorating tips, and honestly, that's enough. Kirby arranges to meet Dale for lunch at a fancy restaurant, where he annoys the waitstaff by arriving 2 hours early for his reservation and demanding the best table, and generally acting like a tool. He calls Jules from the restaurant to ask her advice on choosing a wine. Jules is at her job as a high-powered international banker, though we learn she's received a hefty advance on her paycheck because she's living far beyond her means. A Billy Idol mural with neon accents doesn't come cheap. Dale ends up having to cut lunch short because of an emergency at the hospital, and Kirby responds by acting like an angry child. Kevin stops by Alec and Leslie's loft for dinner. He learns that Alec, a lifelong Democrat who works for a Democratic congressman, is going to work for a Republican senator for more money and prestige. Alec, who is chronically unfaithful, also confesses to Kevin that he had a quickie with a lingerie saleswoman while shopping for a gift for Leslie. Kevin pours his heart out about his unrequited love for Leslie, Leslie to a sex worker named Naomi, played by Anna Maria Horsford, who'd go on to star in Amen and The Wayans Brothers. In the middle of the night, Jules calls Leslie and Alec in a state of panic. She'd been partying with a bunch of wealthy Arab businessmen in a hotel suite, and she's worried that they're planning on gang raping her. Alec barges into the suite to find Jules in no danger. She's just jittery and paranoid from too much cocaine. Billy, who is unemployed and aimless, accompanies Wendy to dinner at the home of her wealthy parents, who are played by Psycho star Martin Balsam and Joyce Van Patten, sister of Dick Van Patten. Balsam and Van Patten were married in the late 1950s, but had been divorced for 23 years at the time of St. Elmo's fire. Wendy's parents want her to abandon her job as a social worker and get married to a nice boy with a steady career. They openly disapprove of Billy, who, to be fair, is pretty obnoxious. After dinner, Wendy, who still lives with her parents, attempts to lose her virginity to Billy, but he drunkenly makes fun of her girdle, which kind of kills the mood. On Halloween, the gang all assembles at St. Elmo's, where Billy plays saxophone with the band. Billy's wife, Felicia, brings a date to the bar, and when Billy spots them kissing, he jumps off the stage and starts a brawl. Felicia is played by Jenny Wright, probably best known for Catherine Bigelow's cult vampire film from 1987, Near Dark, though you may also recognize her as the groupie who goes off with Pink in 1982's Pink Floyd's The Wall. Jules and Leslie visit Wendy while she's helping out at a soup kitchen. It turns out to be a planned intervention. Wendy and Leslie are worried about Jules's cocaine use, her extravagant spending, and her ongoing affair with her married boss. Jules dismisses their concerns. Kirby begins to full-on stalk Dale Biberman. He trails her to a fancy party where he lurks outside in the rain and spies on her before crashing the party and accosting her. Dale, who is much too patient with this nonsense, explains that he doesn't know anything about her and thus really can't be in love with her. Kirby's takeaway from this conversation is that she'd date him if he were rich, so he takes a job as an assistant to a wealthy Korean businessman, Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim is played by Portuguese-Chinese actor Mario Machado, a former Los Angeles news anchor best known to film audiences for playing news anchor Casey Wong in the RoboCop films. Kirby immediately borrows his new boss's fancy car to invite Dale to a big party at Mr. Kim's mansion. Kirby is furious when Dale doesn't show up to his party, and he storms out to hunt her down. Alec announces to the partygoers that he and Leslie are engaged, which is news to Leslie. She confronts him about this, and when Alec angrily asks her why she won't marry him, she blames it on his numerous affairs. Assuming this means Kevin told her about his fling with the lingerie saleswoman, Alec attacks Kevin in the middle of the party, and then kicks Leslie out of their loft for the crime of not wanting to marry him. Jules drives Billy home from the party. She wants to have a serious talk about her out-of-control life, but Billy drunkenly misinterprets this as an invitation for sex. When Jules turns him down, he tries to rape her, whereupon Jules dumps him in his front yard and drives off in disgust. A fuming Kirby drives to Dale's apartment, and Dale's roommate tells him that Dale is spending the weekend at a ski lodge. Kirby shows up at the ski lodge, where Dale is weekending with an attractive man, and Kirby flies into a rage. He tries to storm off, but his car gets stuck in the snow, and Dale and her boyfriend invite him to spend the night. Kirby throws a tantrum at their offer of hospitality, whereupon Dale tells him, "I don't really know you all that well, but you seem like a fine man." Does he really now, Dale? Really? A fun game to play while watching St. Elmo's Fire is to try to pick the most despicable character, with the caveat that your opinion will probably change throughout the film. Given a choice between the attempted rapist, the chronic cheater with anger management issues, or the tantrum-prone stalker, I'm going to go ahead and say that Kirby is the worst character in this film, just on the basis of what a whiny, entitled man-child he is in this scene, as he showers verbal abuse on a very nice lady who owes him nothing. Since Alec has kicked her out, Leslie crashes at Kevin's place. She discovers his secret stash of photos of her and realizes he's in love with her, and they have drunken, enthusiastic sex. While they're post-coital, Alec arrives, intending to apologize to Kevin, and finds him in bed with Leslie. In the morning, Dale and her boyfriend are still being far too polite to Kirby. Kirby repays their hospitality by forcibly kissing Dale against her will and driving off in triumph. Leslie arrives at the loft to pick up her belongings, and Alec vents his angry feelings at her. Whole lot of emoting goes on. Nobody emotes like Judd Nelson. Kevin is elated when he gets an editorial on the meaning of life published in the Washington Post. He celebrates with Leslie, who is crashing with Jules. Kevin wants Leslie to move in with him, and Leslie gently breaks it to him that she's not in love with him. Alec is interrupted at his job by an emergency visit from Leslie, who is worried about Jules. All of Jules's belongings have been repossessed, and it turns out she lost her job 3 weeks ago. Jules has barricaded herself inside the now empty apartment with the windows open, and is trying to kill herself by freezing to death. Alec, Leslie, Kirby, and Kevin all converge on Jules' apartment. Jules won't unlock the door, so the guys try to break in through the window, though Alec keeps getting distracted by trying to murder Kevin by dropping him off the fire escape. Billy arrives with a blowtorch, and while Kirby, Leslie, Kevin, and Alec try to remove the window bars, Billy convinces Jules to let him in through the front door. He cheers Jules up by telling her about St. Elmo's fire, the weather phenomenon that creates a glowing ball of light, and the crisis is averted. Later, Billy helps Wendy move into her new apartment. He is moving to New York City to make his way as a musician, and he asks her for a going-away present. Her virginity. She gives it to him because the gender dynamics in this film are often pretty appalling. The entire gang sees Billy off at the bus station. Given a choice between Alec and Kevin, Leslie opts to date neither of them, which is wise. Instead of going for drinks at St. Elmo's, they make a plan to meet for brunch at Houlihan's, because they've all completed their rite of passage into adulthood and are now too old for their old college haunt, seeking instead the more sophisticated pastures of American fast casual chain dining. Despite the commercial success of St. Elmo's Fire, the film initially had trouble getting made. When Schumacher and Kurlander initially tried to interest producers in their script, they met with a great deal of resistance. According to Schumacher, one studio head told him that the 7 protagonists were the most loathsome characters he'd ever read on the page. And yes, it's hard to watch St. Elmo's Fire without thinking, wow, these are all hilariously terrible people. Except for you, Wendy. You're fine. While this isn't a dark satire like Heathers or American Psycho, where the characters are supposed to be repellent, the awfulness of the characters sort of works in the film's favor. The theme of St. Elmo's Fire, which Billy spells out in his speech to Jules when he's saving her from freezing to death, is self-made drama. These recent college graduates are overwhelmingly causing their own problems because they're young and reckless and selfish and overly emotional, and thus they make some very bad decisions on their path to adulthood. While that doesn't make them sympathetic, it's not entirely unrealistic. For as much as critics tend to hate it, parts of St. Elmo's Fire resonate with a lot of us Gen Xers. It's possible to recognize it as superficial and deeply flawed while still responding to its depiction of glossy, privileged young people leading messy yet glamorous lives. It's one of the first films to capture a zeitgeist that was emerging in the mid to late 80s. Jay McInerney's novel Bright Lights, Big City had been published in 1984, and Bret Easton Ellis's Less Than Zero was published in 1985, both to widespread critical acclaim for depicting how the me decade had created a generation of soulless and empty, status-obsessed yuppies. Both Less Than Zero and Bright Lights, Big City would be turned into films in the second half of the decade, but St. Elmo's Fire beat them by a couple of years. While the film really doesn't have anything weighty to say, and while its depiction of its protagonists as shallow and self-absorbed casualties of the Reagan era appears to be mostly accidental, it touches on many of the themes that Ellis and McInerney explored in their writing. The enduring legacy of St. Elmo's Fire, however, is how it unintentionally ended up creating the Brat Pack. While promoting the film, Emilio Estevez agreed to a short profile by journalist David Bloom for the June 10, 1985 issue of New York Magazine. It turned into a wildly uncharitable front-page expose on the spoiled rich kid antics of Estevez and his peers. Bloom accompanied Estevez, Judd Nelson, and Rob Lowe to the Hard Rock Cafe and other haunts around Los Angeles, where they flirted with Playboy playmates and trash-talked Andrew McCarthy and generally acted like, well, brats. To describe Estevez and his friends, Bloom coined the term Brat Pack, which was a play on the 1960s Rat Pack, which was an informal group of luminaries that included Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. The term Brat Pack immediately entered the public lexicon because it was catchy as all hell, and because it was all too easy to associate the bratty young characters of St. Elmo's Fire with the purportedly bratty young stars of the film. The Brat Pack was expanded to include a wide range of young actors, most notably Anthony Michael Hall and Molly Ringwald, who had starred with Estevez, Nelson, and Sheedy in The Breakfast Club. Other young celebrities were often slapped with the Brat Pack label as well, but the stars of The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire are considered the core group. Pretty much every member of that group resented the label. Some have argued that it did them lasting career damage. And they probably have a point. Certainly it had the effect of taking a group of young actors who took themselves and their work very seriously and making them seem frivolous and irresponsible. I never had that reaction. To me, at age 11 or so, I just thought the term Brat Pack was a handy way to refer to a group of actors I really liked. As much as the Brat Pack label was a burden, and as much as St. Elmo's Fire is a problematic mess of a film, many Gen Xers look back upon it and its attractive young cast with a great deal of nostalgia-tinted fondness. Speaking of nostalgia, next week we're going back in time to 1955, and we're going to take a souped-up DeLorean to get there with an in-depth look at Back to the Future. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll meet you back here then.